Hello, and welcome along to the stream tonight. I hope that everyone is doing well. In terms of where I'm at, as a quick recap, so I wasn't here last week. I don't remember why I wasn't here last week, but I wasn't here last week. I have now got, I think I've got all of my stream set up back up and running the way that I wanted it to. So previously we had a stream where I was going through how to set up OBS again, basically. So during my streams I had transitioned to using Streamlabs OBS, and for one or more reasons I opted to move back to using OBS directly. So that's now what I'm using. And I've got my normal scenes set up now, so you should still be able to hear me while I'm flipping back between these. So I've got my be right back, I've got my stream ending scenes, I've got my starting streams scenes, and I've got my main one, which is the shared screen that I've got here. What we ended up doing on the stream a couple of weeks ago was how can we get audio and potentially video, because I've just found out that you can do screen sharing through Discord as well. But how can I take the audio content from Discord and bring that into stream? Now, we faffed around a little bit there, and eventually we got it to work. But the long and the short of it was there was a new bit of software that I could add to my Mac, which would provide the ability to combine audio output streams together and combine them into one input stream and into OBS, and it's exactly what I wanted to do. So we got all that working. I haven't really played with that yet, but we are up and running. I just need to play with it a little more. Now, I just realised that I've not had any messages in the chat message, but I don't know if that's because I haven't had any chats, which is entirely possible. But I also, because of the new setup, I'm just going to try and go into my own chat, which is why I'm a little bit distracted. I do apologise for that. Where do I get chat again? Through here, my channel maybe, and then chat. I'll just send myself a message saying hello. And if that pops up, then I know it's working. Okay, so it is working. Right. Although it's at the top, I would have expected it at the bottom. Never mind. So the aim of tonight's stream was, or is going to be, about a tool that I work on called GitReleaseManager. So GitReleaseManager is a application that has had a little bit of a convoluted history, but if I can spell it properly, I've got something wrong there. Let's go to Git Tools and let's go into GitReleaseManager. So we've done some stuff on GitReleaseManager in the past on the stream, but the history of GitReleaseManager is it's always been predominantly for generating release notes and managing releases on GitHub. Now, for one or more reasons, I need to start switching GitReleaseManager to also using GitLab in the same way that you can do GitHub. Now, on previous streams, hey Corey, how's it going? On previous streams, we've looked at the architectural patterns that needed to be changed within GitReleaseManager to allow it to have different providers. The default one being GitHub, but I want to be able to do the same functionality as you can in GitHub on GitLab as well. Now, I seem to remember digging into this at some point, and I got a ways down the road. I can't find that code. I think I did it on a stream, but I can't remember. So I'm basically going to have to start again. which is a little bit annoying. But what we have, so if we go up to here, we have this IVCS provider that for some reason Visual Studio can't see. So let me just build that again. I might have to do the old switch it off and switch it on again, because that's a little bit annoying. Okay, let's close and reopen Visual Studio. I don't understand why it can't see the IVCS provider. In fact, let's just use 2019 rather than 2022. The base interface IVCS provider provides the core functionality of communicating with the VCS, so the version control system. And again, the default is GitHub, but we want to be able to have different implementations for other version control systems. And the one that I want to play with is GitLab. But if we look at the issues, then there's at least one other open issue, because someone did express an interest in having a Git-IA or Git-T. I don't actually know how you pronounce that one. We'll go with Git-T, a Git-T provider to do the exact same stuff. That didn't go anywhere, unfortunately, and Git-T is not something that I use. So I don't think I'll be picking that one up, whereas I do use GitLab at work. And because I've been touting how GitReleaseManager works on GitHub, we've had agreement that we should be able to start using that on GitLab as well. And what I need to be able to do is to start to implement the necessary methods to allow GitReleaseManager to, when instructed to, use GitLab. Now, we don't want to break anyone, obviously, so anyone actively using GitReleaseManager today shouldn't have to change anything or do anything different to how they're using it today. So we want to make sure that we don't break anything. So the default provider will still be GitHub, so nothing will change there. But what we will do is provide an additional argument that the user can then pass in to say, well, I want to use this provider. And we'll probably do that via some sort of enumeration on the passed in argument to then say, well, I'm using GitHub, or I'm using GitLab, or Git-T if someone wants to implement that one. So now that that's built, let's see if we can't find the IVCS provider, which is, that's where it's at least used. Let's bring that up. And if we go ahead and F12 to that, then this is what we're dealing with. So let's make this a little bit bigger so that everyone can see it. So most version control systems have some concept of releases, of issues, of milestones, of commits, etc. So what this base interface is really all about is get me the information that I'm interested in. So i.e. Upload an asset, delete an asset, get issues, get issue comments, create labels, delete labels. All of these things can typically be done on a version control system. So what we need to do is we need to provide an implementation of this specifically for GitHub. And then if we go back to where this was called from, so currently at the minute, we have a single registration in our IOC container that says, I'm GitReleaseManager, go ahead and add a single instance for that interface, which is the GitHub provider. But we then need to be able to control which thing gets registered in the IOC container. So again, based on what provider is passed in, either the GitHub implementation gets passed in, or the GitLab one does. So this code base is relatively old in my head. I haven't looked at the GitReleaseManager code base for a while now, so there will be a little bit of stumbling in the dark. But what I aim to do tonight is to get to a point where we have a new method, or not a new method, a new property on the base options class that we pass into GitReleaseManager to say what provider do you want to use, and then start to stub out the implementation of the GitLab provider class, and then potentially toy with well, what library are we going to use to talk with GitLab? So in the case of GitHub, we use the OctoKit library for talking to the API, getting the issues, updating the commit messages, all that sort of stuff. You can do all that. You can do all of that through the OctoKit API. So what we need to do is we need to find an equivalent library for GitLab. And I went down this path before, and there was 2 or 3 different ones. I found one that did at least a portion of the work that I wanted to do, but I then came across a stumbling block because it didn't handle releases. So I'm hoping now that there's been a delay between me playing with it before and coming back to it now that that's now changed. If not, in order to complete the work that I would want to do, it may be the case that we need to do some additional work to provide some contributions to those libraries to add in the missing surface area for the library. So there's definitely some areas in there. So the thing I was going to look at first then was these sub options. So the way that the command line parsing library that we have here works, it has the concept of options. Now there's an open issue on GitReleaseManager to switching away from our current command line argument parsing tool to something else. That something else being Spectre Console. That's definitely something I still want to do, but that's not part of the work that I'm going to be doing tonight, at the very least. But if we go in here and we look at the base VCS options, then if we go all the way down, then these are all the arguments that are common to every single command that GitReleaseManager does. So I suspect what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add in an additional option here that is something like VCS type, which will be an enum. I always hesitate about calling the property name the same as the enum, but we'll stick with it just now. So we'll do a get and a set here, and this is going to be an option, and this is going to be something that's called, I suspect that the P is already going to be used. So let's go for a long command line argument, which is provider, and then the help text of that thing is going to be the what do I want to say? This wants to be the version control system that GitReleaseManager should target, and then we're going to say at the end of this defaults to GitHub, because that is what we're going to want. And then what I want to know is within this command line system, how do we do a default value? So we need to look at that as well. Let's see where we keep our enums in this project, because there's bound to be at least one, I would have thought. There's one in there, look. So where does this live? This is here, and this is under model. So does that fit with the VCS type? Yeah, let's put it in there for just now. So we'll add a class called VCS type. And then in here, we'll change this to be a public enum. And then in here, we're going to have GitHub, which is going to be 0. And we'll do the only other one that we're talking about at the minute, which is GitLab, which is 1. And then using trailing commas in multi-line initializers. Oh yeah, that wants a closing comma because that's what this project is set up to use. And then in here we can do a summary similar to what we've got here. We could say GitHub VCS provider. And then in here we would say GitLab VCS provider. Okay, I think that wants a line there. So that should be our base options setup. This might need an include in order to bring it through. There we go. So then I'm going to go and do a little bit of Googling for the command line NuGet package. So if we go up here and look at NuGet and we look at command line, that's not going to find it because I spelt it wrong. But we'll go and have a look at command line. There seems to be a lot of them. So let's just go to this one and command line. Ooh, that doesn't bode well. Let's do a sanity check on whether that's the same. That can't be the same package. I don't believe that. Or I hope not. So if we look at the NuGet packages for this project, I can find it. It's command line parser. Feeling better now that it's not completely deprecated, hopefully. There we go. Okay, so it supports .NET Standard 2.0 and .NET Framework 4.0. It was last updated in 2020. If we look at versions 2.80, which version are we on? We're on that one. That's a good start. So let's look at the project website and find out what docs there are. Nightly builds, at a glance, verb commands, include wiki documentation. Let's have a quick search in here and see if there's any mention of one-line parsing using default singleton. No, okay. Documentation. Is it in the wiki? Oh, there we go. Okay. So, option attributes, how-tos. Let's have a look at FAQs, see what we can find in there. Okay, not much happening in there. You can define option groups. I don't think that's what we want. Help text. Let's have a look at the option attribute. Gets or sets mapped property default value. Well, that sounds. Oh, I see. It's a different attribute on the option. So in the way that we've got help text, there's a default. Yes. The name default. So what does it want? Is an object. Okay, so let's put in VCS type.github. Ooh, that looks promising. Okay, so if I do a build there, score 1 for the documentation. Let's see what this, although we weren't going to call it VCS. No, that's not what I want to call it at all. That's just silly. We'll stick with it just now. But that's not actually what I wanted to do. I've called the option here what I wanted to call it, which was provider, but I haven't called this one here called provider. So what I was going to do next was, let's have a breakpoint in the main program, and we will start parsing through some things to remind myself how this thing even works. So the default project at the minute is GitReleaseManager.test, so that's not going to work. Let's set the default project as this one. Set as my startup project, and let's go ahead and run that. And let's see if my breakpoint gets hit. And we'll have a look at that base sub option, and just to make sure that it is working as expected. So we're going to step into here, and based on what's passed in, we will look at stuff. But at this point, I could set a watch window on the ops argument, I think. Oh no, it's on the map result, so that's not going to be helpful. So what I suspect then is let's go into the register services method. I think we should get there. Yes. And then in here, it's not ops, it's options. So in here, our VCS type is GitHub. So it has defaulted to GitHub. So that's exactly what we wanted. So if we go back to that VCS type, no, in the sub options. So this is going to be provider here. So then if I go into the properties of this guy, and oh, it was doing a lot of stuff. If we do this as provider GitLab, what happens then? Let's have a look. Because it's in the register services method that we're going to want to change what we're adding into the IOC container, and one of them we're going to want to do the GitHub provider, and the other one we're going to want a new one that is the GitLab provider. Now that errored because verb provider is not recognized. Okay, that makes sense because I'm not doing a command. So let's remind myself and everyone else. So .NET, if I run, I've got GitReleaseManager installed on this machine. So if I run that, these are all the commands that you can run. So I need to run one of the commands in order to, now where did I add that? I added that to the base sub options. That's actually maybe the wrong place to put it. Thinking about it, I think where we want to go instead is the base VCS sub options, i.e. because some of the commands, go back to here a second, and we won't need that, but we can go into here and put that in there. Some of the commands within GitReleaseManager don't target a VCS. So looking through the list, create, discard, add assets, close, open, publish, export. These all do stuff with a VCS, whereas the init command or the show config or the help or the version command, they don't. So there's nothing for them to do. So let's go back to here and let's imagine that we're running the export command and see what that does. Now this may still fail because there might be required parameters that are passed in. So let's see what happens when we run this. So we can run through that again. And we get a, required option. Option provider is defined in a bad format. Okay. What does that mean? Is it expecting that we do that as an equals? That's possible. And let's go back here. If we do GitReleaseManager export-h, we can actually find out. Why did that not give me the help? It's -- help. Okay, learn something new. -- help. So this is required. These need to be removed at some point, or I might have already. I've got an older version of GitReleaseManager installed. So we need an output path. We need a token, an owner, a repository. So let's go and flood this up a little bit. So we'll do dash token equals Bob dash U equals me dash P equals password. No, we won't need that. No, we don't need the username and password because we've given the token owner. So we need an owner, which is get13. We need a repository, which is get13. These are obviously not going to work, but let's just get the basic running of the command. Required F is missing, so we're still missing an F for the output path. So in this case, we'll just do F equals C temp notes.md. And it's still failing. It's still saying that the provider is defined with a bad format. Provider, default GitHub, the version control system. Bad format. Let's see if it's being, I'm hoping that it's not going to be case sensitive, but let's try it. It is. Okay, that's something to. So here the provider is GitLab. Okay, so we'll come back to that part. So in here under register services, what we want to do is we want to say if, oh, something's thinking, if we say if, actually we can do what was a way to do in this one. So if the options is base VCS options, then we're creating a new GitHub client. Oh, I see, okay. And then we're registering the GitHub. So this is the part, this is where we want to start doing stuff. So then we need to say if options dot VCS options. Oh, sorry, I missed the other side of that. So it's a VCS options dot provider equals that dot GitHub. I'm hoping that we can take that off. We should probably do a switch. Should we do a switch statement here? We should maybe do a switch statement. So we're going to switch on the VCS options dot provider, and Visual Studio stubbed out the ones that are there for us, which is great. So in here, we're going to say, if we're GitHub, we're going to do what we did before. But in addition, we are going to do a couple of other things. So before we did this, so I'm going to take that one out of there, because I only want to register that in here, I think. And then down in here, we're going to do stuff. So we'll put in a note here, register VCS provider for GitLab. Fine. So if we come back to here and say, well, we're not doing this part. Let's take the provider off of there and just run this through. Then we let that run through. I think I've still got a breakpoint, I do. So we come down to here. Let's put the breakpoint there rather than on this one. Let's run that through. So if the options is a VCS root, it is, token isn't null, and we switch on the VCS provider. The VCS provider is GitHub, so we will do these things that we were doing before, and it runs through. So it's going to fail because the token's going to be invalid, but let's just throw a new exception where the exception message is bad credentials. That's exactly right. Okay. So then if we go back to our program.cs, let's remove this one and back into here. So then what we want to do, at the very least, we need to do service collection equals service collection dot add singleton, add singleton of VCS provider, and then in here we're going to say GitLab provider. Now we don't have that one yet, but we'll go ahead and we'll create that in a second. So GitHub provider, where does that live? That lives in a provider folder. Let's just create another one then. So we're going to add a class and that class is going to be GitLab provider, and GitLab provider is going to be a public that implements the IVCS provider. That's going to want to implement a bunch of stuff, and that looks great to me. Okay, so that's just going to throw a bunch of exceptions, which is perfectly fine for where we are right now. Okay, so we go back to our, let's get rid of GitHub at the minute, program.cs, and now we've got an IVCS provider that implements GitLab provider, and nothing should have changed there because we're still running GitHub. If we go back over here and once again say provider equals GitLab, so we should go at the second option in our current switch statement, and it should attempt to communicate with GitLab, and that should throw an exception because we've got no mechanism to communicate with GitLab at the minute. So let's go down to here, and then it says if the base options is VCS, we are providing a token, but there's nothing in it. So then we switch on GitLab, we add an implementation of the IVCS provider, in this case the GitLab provider, and then because we are running the export command, it should get to here. So then in here, where does it get to? It gets there, and obviously at some point this is going to die. Because it's then the method or operation is not implemented. That's exactly right. So back over on our output, it says the method or operation is not implemented. Perfect. Okay, so it doesn't do anything yet, but the basic framework is there for doing exactly what we need. So then we get to the next question, which is how do we communicate with GitLab? So, because at this point, what would be a good one to play with? A good one to play with would be, let's go back to here and say --help. A good one to play with, but one that I don't think was in the provider the last time I checked, would be the opening and closing of milestones. So let's have a bit of a Google for .NET GitLab library. This is the one that I was looking at previously. That one I don't remember. Let's see. Fairly sure that this is the one that I was looking at, and I will know that if I come in here and I find an issue. Yes. Okay, fine. So that is, or this is the one that I was looking at. GitLab.net was last updated 5 years ago, so I'm already ruling that out. Whereas this one was updated until end of last year. let's just have a quick look on NuGet and see what other ones turn up. So if we search here for GitLab API client, that's the one that we were just looking at. Yes, it was. Pulumi GitLab, creating and managing GitLab. No, that's for Pulumi is an infrastructure as code setup, so that must be their implementation for. Interesting to see what they might have used though. So what have they used on the back end for communicating with GitLab? There's Paul Stack. Oh, this isn't a whole different. This is not code that I'm going to know how to look at this all in Go, so we can't look at that one as a source of reference. GitLab REST API client. That might be worth a look. ASP.NET, GitLab, no. GitLab changelog generator, no. What was this one? README. What is ngtlab? ngtlab is the .NET REST client implementation of GitLab API with no external dependencies. It's a wrapper of the REST API. Read the GitLab docs by using the creating an instance. Whoa. You can get it from there. Thanks. So we'll look at the source repository. Seems to be active. So you just create a new instance of the GitLab client, passing in your token, and then use its properties. You can obtain the private token from your there. There's not much in the way of docs, but okay. And it's just pointing us at the GitLab docs, which is numerous. Okay. Okay. And here, what does it have in the way of milestones? So it does have one for milestones. And from a milestone perspective, I can get a project's milestones. I can, okay. Interesting. Does it claim then to be a complete implementation? Let's have a quick look at ngtlab. Is this broken up into branch, deployments? It does have milestones. Does it have releases? Has releases. Okay. What was the one that I was interested in over here? If I go back to issues and I look at author here, because one of the things I need to be able to do is to be able to compare tokens, and I forget this guy's name, Yosef. He was pointing me at the repositories API, or was he? Or is that where it's linked to? Repositories, compare branches, tags, and commits. So do they have in here a repositories API as a repository client? What's in here? This has got tags, contributors, get tree, compare. Does it have compare? Because it was the one thing that was missing in the other library. Let's have a sneaky peek in here. No, doesn't have a compare. is that what they actually called it? They did. Okay. Commit, unless it's a different one. Let's just have a quick look in here for compare. Oh no, hold on. Maybe. The get git repository. No, that's something different. That's not what we want at all, I don't think. Okay, let's give it a try. Let's give GitLab a try. So we need to provide a GitLab client. So looking at the code, when we did the program.cs, what we did was we registered a new GitHub client and we added that as a singleton specifically of that implementation. So we're going to want to do something similar then. So we're going to want to say var GitLab client. Now is that the actual GitHub client? The one that comes directly from OctoKit? Yes, it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and add another package into here then. That is, so in here we will have OctoKit. So let's put in another one that is ngtlab, and it's currently at version 6.12.5. Let's add a new one here then. Package reference include equals that one, and then version equals, oh, something bad happened there, 6.12.5. I'm going to copy that, and I suspect I'm going to put that into this project as well. Yeah. Okay. So then we can close both of those just now. And then in here, we should then be able to do GitLab client. Maybe. Source repository. New GitLab client. Claims to want to be able to do it. There we go. End using. And then in here, and GitLab client, who either takes a host URL or a token. Now, so that's similar to what we've got on here. So for now, we will put a URL in there, and then we'll say VCS options.token. Oh, sorry, actually I'm doing wrong. Idiot. New GitLab client, and then into here, we are going to say dot add singleton of I. Oh, see, hold on. That's an implementation detail though, really, isn't it? Because there is an interface that is the iGitHub client, is there a similar interface on the GitLab client? There is. Perfect. Okay, so we'll register an instance of that as our GitLab client, which is this one. Okay, and then this is probably going to say it wants an actual URL. Let's look at the definitions again. So it wants a string that is the host URL and the token. Okay, so why did that not like what I was doing? Oh, I see. Okay, it's not it's my what's the word I'm looking for? It's my coding conventions that says it can't do it. Okay, so with that in play, it should probably complain. So let's find out. Because the way that GitLab works, it would appear it wants a URL. So in here, we then needed to provide, this is my GitLab instance. So we could take that off, I think, and let that run through to here. And then we could take that off and let that run through to here. And I suspect that that's going to fail. And it's going to fail with host URL is mandatory. Fine. So then the question becomes, how are we going to provide the URL to GitLab? Because GitLab has, you see, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. Because basically I would like to be able to use a similar structure that we've currently got. So when we go into here and we say create -- help, then the structure of the command line is very much based around, well, give me the owner and give me the repository, and I'll construct under the hood a URL for you, because I know it's GitHub. GitHub is always github.com/owner/repository. Now the same is not true of GitLab, because you can construct nested folder structures of projects. So a repository that's called Bob can live under an organization called foo with a subfolder bar. So the URL is gitlab.com/bar/foo/Bob. But if we go down that route, and because GitLab can be hosted internally and not on gitlab.com, it's unlikely that we would ever know it's very unlikely we would be able to construct the URL from the owner and repository. So then the question becomes, how do we separate these options when you're doing provider GitHub? How do you provide the URL and not the owner and repository? And then it starts to get a little complicated. Interesting. let's go back and look at the here we had the GitLab client that it always had a host URL, and then it was either a token, a username and password, or the request options. And the request options has things like retry count, retry interval, is incremental, and a client timeout. Okay. And then for that project, I can get a list of milestone. Well, I'm not seeing milestones actually. We can get a list of projects, merge requests, issues. Now that's at the top level. So then I must be able to get, yeah, for a given project ID, I can then get specific things. And then there's a static on the GitHub client as well to connect using the same information. And then I can get a milestone for the project ID. So what is the project ID? The project ID is an int. How does one get the project ID? What did they do in the example? The example was here, which was, oh no, there wasn't an example. So you just got the GitLab client, and then from the client you did stuff. So how does one find a specific project? Interesting. Might have liked a little bit of more information in there. Those are all just, maybe it is aimed at the raw GitLab docs. So again, what does the GitLab docs say? So for a given project, can you get a project by a name? And then from there you get the ID. Projects, what does it have? A project in GitLab can be private, internal, or public. Expected. Project, list all projects. No, don't necessarily want to do that. We've got list all projects, list user projects, get a single project. Get a specific project. This endpoint can be accessed without authentication if the project is publicly accessible. Yeah, how does one know what the ID is? Edit project, start a project, delete a project, hooks. I would have expected that this would have been PM, unit test, install Docker, executing tests, all of that's fine. Closed. At least, if I recall correctly, there was at least examples of here. So you, oh no, see the ID here, that's the difference. Okay, so in this one you provide, and this one being the GitHub API client, you provide the group and the project, and then from there it finds the one you're talking about. So in the example that I used before, which was foo bar Bob, then it would be you would literally put that full part in there. So you don't need to know the ID, it's based on essentially the URL. So in this one, how does one get the ID? But in order to test this out, I'm going to need to create a GitLab something to be able to play with it. That's not necessarily something I want to do on a stream, but let's have a think about what we need to do over here so we can stub out some of it. So if we go back to the GitHub provider, that's the GitLab one, but let's go into here and look at the GitHub one. Then what did we do in here? Let's see what we did. We've got a get milestone. Let's start with milestones. I don't know why, but I want to start with milestones. Get milestones async is making a request directly to OctoKit to say, give me the list of milestones, and then we're returning that. Oh, this was the other part. Oh, it's all coming back now. We made it such that this thing that was a milestone had the core properties that each VCS is expected to implement. Now that's not a guarantee that there's going to be a direct mapping, so there's maybe some playing that we're going to need to do there to make them all line up. But from there, we're getting a list of milestones that are OctoKit milestones, and then there must be a mapping through AutoMapper. Now I have to remember where that's done. In the GitHub profile, there is a mapping between milestone, the model, and the OctoKit milestone. So that means that we must reference this from somewhere. GitHub profile. Where's that used? Because or how is AutoMapper finding that again? Because how is it? How does what causes that to be called? Because we need to do the same for GitLab. Interesting. So from there, within the AutoMapper configuration, which is called from here, what does that do? Add maps, type of AutoMapper configuration. Now what I think that needs to be a conditional based on or what does that do? Hold on. Let's maybe create another one. Add class that is GitLab profile. from there, we want that public class that then wants to implement or use that rather, and then from there we want stuff. So let's just borrow that and say that. Now we don't want to do that though, and that obviously won't work. So in GitLab, it is in GitLab, isn't it? No, okay, let's do that. And then in my GitLab provider, which is here, well, it doesn't do anything yet. So where have we used it? We've done it in the program.cs. So in here, it was in GitLab. So in here, oh, we don't have it in core yet. So that means we have OctoKit, but we don't have in GitLab. So we need to go further back into here. We need to borrow this one. One of these can now be a transitive dependency to the other, but let's put it in here at the minute. Okay, so then in here, we should hopefully then be able to get in GitLab and that should then be able to give me struggling to, there we go. So what does this issue have on it? This has things like, so we might have to put things together. So in our GitHub profile, we map our internal model to the OctoKit issue. The OctoKit issue has these properties, things like milestone, etc. Now, it's entirely likely that the way, or let's take a step back. The way that this project was broken up to allow for another provider to come along was that we broke up, or there's a hard-coded mapping before to OctoKit issue to where issues are used within GitReleaseManager. So we broke that out and we created these internal representations of the external thing that is the issue, but it's essentially a one-to-one mapping between what's in the model issue and what's in the OctoKit issue, i.e. for the things that we need, the title, the number, the labels, etc. Now, in our GitLab profile, there isn't going to be something called whatever. It might be called ID where it was called name before. It might be called titled where it was titled before. So in the GitLab profile, we're likely going to need to do much more custom mappers, whereas in the GitHub one, it's literally one-to-one. But let's put it in just to see if this thing gets executed at all. Because if it does, it's a starter to know that we can put that stuff in. So let's let that run. And see what it does. thinking. So it comes into the GitHub one, fine. Ooh, it comes into the GitLab one as well. Okay, so there's some convention in play where it adds the mappers based on that call to the autofact configuration.addMaps. That then would come into our breakpoint, which is the setting up the GitHub client, which will ultimately fail because we're not passing in a URL. So that will then error out saying the host URL is mandatory. Okay, so then the question becomes where to go next. Because what to do next? Let's close down some of this and have a think about where we're going to go. We can close, that one might be useful. What else have we still got open? That's about where we need to be. The sub options can come away. Okay, so in our GitHub provider, Corey's got a semi-random question. Is there any sort of bare bone extension for Cake that someone could use for a starting point for building their own? A bare bones extension. Do you mean, you use the word extension there, but do you mean an alias or an add-in, sorry? Are you wanting to create your own add-in or tool for Cake in order to have it do something? So for example, Cake has a built-in add-in for Twitter. It has a built-in add-in for Slack. It has a built-in add-in for Git. All of those are extensions, overloaded term, to the Cake DSL, where you bring your own aliases to the mix. So let's start there. Is that what you're after? I'll wait on a response on that one, Corey. Because the answer to that one is yes, there is, but I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. Thinking of something to run pester tests. So yeah, so you would want an add-in that had an alias that was run pester. Within that add-in, you would then have, it would have the knowledge of knowing where to find the pester tool, the available command line options you pass into it, etc. Cake.yarn runs yarn. Yes, exactly that. So the short answer is yes. Do I have it in here? Build. I probably don't have it installed in here. So there's there is a Cake extension for Visual Studio that brings with it some project templates. So once that's installed, I'll need to restart Visual Studio to install it. Now don't run off and install this yet because it might not be exactly what you want. But let me close down this and then that should kick in. Sure. We're sort of in a little bit of, we being the Cake team, we're in a little bit of flux with regard to project templates and our recommended way of doing things. But while that's happening, if I go up to github.com/wormycorp, I think that's how we spell it. Kim has a yeoman generator for Cake that will stub out a project template for you, which is an add-in. Now in there it will ask you questions along the lines of, do you want this, do you want this, do you want this, and it will ultimately spit you out a set of files that are a project template that will get you a big part of the initial setup. Now what I'm going to point you at in Visual Studio Extension is that you can then do File New Project, and from there you can select either a Cake add-in or a Cake module, or I forget the other ones, but let me show you it once it opens. The ones within the Visual Studio extension are quite out of date, so you have a little bit of work to do there. But if you now then went to New Project and searched up in here for Cake, then you have, well, is it an add-in? Is it an add-in with unit test projects? Is it an add-in with unit test project empty? Is it a Cake module, etc.? So by running that, if I were to go next here, and sure, let's just go create there, then that would stub out the main part of an add-in project, similar to what cake.yarn is. And yes, it is very much a semi-random question. So in here, you get the bare minimum of the add-in aliases class that then has a method that does some stuff with the iCake context. There's not a lot there. But if you use, I don't think I've got it installed, or do I? Have I got Yeoman installed? I maybe do have Yeoman installed. So let's go back to Kim's one. So up here, I should be able to then do this. And then if I do that, no, I clearly don't have, I'm not sure what's going on there. I've obviously got something not set up properly. Let me just try that. That's doing a bunch of stuff. I see some errors though. Never quite sure whether an npm error is an actual error or whether it's something it can recover from. A lot of stuff flying past my screen there. But what we're getting at is, if I were you, if you wanted to start with an actual shell of a project, probably best to start with Kim's Yeoman generator, because it will spit out a newer variant of what's done or what's recommended. The other way would obviously just be to use cake.yarn as a starting point, or pick one and kind of copy what it does and make it specific to your cake.pester implementation. Now there is a cake.powershell add-in that might be a useful one to look at for exercising PowerShell, but because pester is, you can just call pester, right? You don't need to specifically call PowerShell, if I recall correctly. There's a lot of stuff happening in this thing. And then it errored out. Not okay. I don't know. If you've got Yeoman installed, have a go at using Kim's add-in cakes. Have a go at using Kim's Yeoman generator for cake add-in and look at what it spits out. well, no, not within. But that so okay so but that's something that you would control within the add-in, within the runner for the add-in, that said how do you actually how do you start the underlying process and what process do you want it to run in. That's something you would take control of within the add-in itself. So it's maybe worth taking a look at how the cake.powershell add-in executes a given version of PowerShell to then pass commands to it. Or, I mean, depending on what you're trying to do, maybe the cake.powershell module does enough, or is generic enough that you can just run pester tests. But I guess what you're really looking at is, well, what do you want to do with the results from the pester tests? Are you looking to be able to collect them to then do stuff with the results, or are you just reporting on the results, or are you just executing pester? Lots of questions in there as to actually what you want to achieve. Anyway, file, recent projects and solutions, GitReleaseManager. I'm going to go back to that. I keep coming back to this URL and how one does that. So often this screen over here, I'm at least going to look at what I've got on here, and if I got a test project of some kind on GitLab where I could create something, personal projects, view all. How does one create a project again on GitLab? Oh, there's a plus button. Plus, new group, new project or repository. Let's do that then. Create a blank project. Import, I'm going to create a blank project. And we're going to call it GRM test. We'll make it public. Initialize with a readme. Beautiful. Okay. So the URL that this thing wants is, if I go back to my program.cs, I'm going to hard code the snot out of this at the minute. Oh, I didn't put in my this. Let's see what that does, just out of curiosity. The token is still invalid. It's still got Bob as the token. But I just wonder, because I made it public, whether it will let me do it without authentication. Let's see what it does. Okay, so I can take that one off actually. I don't need that one. Don't need that one at the minute. Okay, so then F10 over that. Okay, didn't die. And I got into the execute of my export. So at this point, what have I got? I have a VCS service. Well, actually, no, hold on. I'm not sure if this is ready for the export command. Takes an IVCS service. The IVCS service, what does, oh, I see. So in here, we would have, this is not pretty. I feel some refactoring coming into play here. Because when we registered the IVCS service, we must have passed in the GitHub client. I think. So this VCS service, I suspect, will take, no, it does not. So how does it get, where is it getting VCS provider? I'm so confused. GitHub client. Where is it used? Oh, just within the provider. Okay, I guess that makes sense. Okay, fine. Okay, I could see that. And then within the export command, we then call a method on the VCS service that is export release notes async. Fine, okay. So we have a method that is, where's my close command? So that's there. I'm just trying to think about a simple one to get started with. And I keep coming back to the open and close milestones. So let's set a breakpoint in here then. And we're going to go back to the close method of a milestone. So that means up here, we're going to go to properties, and rather than do an export, we'll do a close. And let's see what that does. Option F is unknown. Okay, so we don't need the F anymore. Fine. Let's try that. And then milestone is missing. So we don't have a milestone, but I can fix that. So issues, milestones, new milestone, 1.1.1. So something reasonably unique. And then over here, we can say -m equals 1.1.1. Okay, run. Beautiful. Okay, so then we come into here. Now we're into the execute method of the close command. That looks more promising. So then, if I step into this, oh, that's where my buttons don't work. F11 is this one. That's in the VCS service. Then in my provider, oh, I stepped into that one, I shouldn't have. Then in here, that's going to throw a not implemented exception. Fine. Get milestone async. That's where we need the client. Okay, it's all coming back to me now. So if we close all but this, sure, and then we open up our this one, then the get milestone async is that one there, and then in here, that's where we were doing the request, and that's where we have access to the GitHub client, and that's only available because we put it into the constructor. So if we go back to here, then we can create ourselves a constructor. And then in here, we will create a private read-only GitLab client, which is GitLab client. Then that needs a something or other, which is our n-GitLab. And then in here, we will create an GitLab client, whose underscore GitLab client. I don't think I've got an underscore up there, but I meant to. Is equal to GitLab client. Fine. The other stuff we were putting in there was a mapper. Why do we put a mapper in there? Oh, for converting the things with the stuffs. So we probably want one of those too. So we'll preemptively put that in just now, even though we don't have a need for it yet, but we'll put it in anyway. So then mapper equals mapper. That needs a reference or a using to automapper. Okay, so then down here, we want to do stuff. And that's where we want to be able to do get milestone for a project ID. And this is where I'm getting confused. So in here, we should have get projects then. Get I'm so confused. Projects. Accessible, create, get. No, that's not really what I want either. Get by ID. I don't know the ID. Get by namespace and path. So the URL I gave it was to the host URL. This is where I get all sorts of confused in how GitLab works, because where we had this, all of that needs a project ID. If we go back to our program.cs again, when we created the instance of the client, I gave it a URL, which was there. It refers to that as the host URL. In my case then, is that just gitlab.com? Maybe that's what I need to do. And then, this is all guesswork at this point, but let's say that this becomes, so my host is gitlab.com, where I could be hosting that internally, maybe. So then in here, when I am then trying to get a project dot get by namespaced path. If I do that and I say this one, what does that give me, if anything? Var project equals await async. What are you? That's fine. Okay, so let's try that. That still wouldn't be the owner in repository, because that could still be in a subfolder in a group. So we couldn't use that. We could maybe default to it, but we wouldn't be able to rely on it. That's fine, because I've got another breakpoint, right? No? GitLab server error returned and 401 unauthorized. It's trying to do a get to gitlab.com/API/v4 projects to then be, well, let's borrow that, because it's public, so it kind of should be there. .404 not found. .404 not found. I've got a vague recollection of having gone through this before, and there was an aha moment where things just made sense, but I can't remember what that aha moment was. And GitLab example find project by name. What's this? See, where do I find the project ID? I don't really want to be looking at the HTML, but thanks. No, I shouldn't have to do that at all. Oh, what's this? Sure. This dot client, that doesn't really help. Hot examples. Ooh, that's maybe something we could look at. So, GitLab. There's a used by, isn't there? Oh no, that's in the, normally over here. GitLab used by dev audit library. Let's see what they do. project website. Sure. Dev audit. Fine. Uses OSS database index. Okay. Let's have a search in here for GitLab client. And it's, oh, come on now. Tests. Command line. Samples. Porters. That doesn't really help. Command line options. Option GitLab. GitLab issue reporter. Let's have a look in there. But it does look like they are using the same command line parser that I've got, or the same one that I'm using. So what do they have? They have, oh, they've got an audit for chocolatey. Okay, that's something else to come back to look at. Host, user, password, key, WinRM. GitLab report, lots of stuff. Okay, fine. Nope. GitLab issue reporters. GitLab client. So where's client? Client is then the host URL. Host URL is audit options, GitLab report URL. GitLab report URL is there. And then you have to client.projects.owned. And then where, okay. But then I haven't provided a token. So yeah, I don't like having to do that. I really don't. I really don't like having to do that. Sonatype Nexus Community Dev Audit. That's the one I was just looking at, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Might have to come back and look at this one. Well, it hasn't been updated in a while. Don't feel like I've got a lot done tonight, but progress has been made. I guess I just need to get more familiar with the GitLab API to then be able to know what needs to be done at this level. So let's go back in here. GitLab client dot projects. There was a get milestone, but that needs a project ID. But even that, oh, that gives you a milestone client, and then from there you can then do a get. I see, that's where it comes from. Okay. And that needs a query. Dot get what would I want to do, or what would I need to do in there? New milestone query. Dot. Oh, look at that. You can say whether they're, well, it would just be that, I guess. Var milestones. And if we go back to the one that I discarded, just so that I can find out the project ID. Inspect code. Project underscore ID. There is an ID in there. I've no idea whether that's even. No, surely not. It's in at least a couple of places, and the number is the same. So let's try it. I just want to see if this works now. What does this need again? That needed the project ID. Fine. Project ID is that. Now that still won't work because the token's not right. But let's see if I can get to it because it's a public property, a public project. Maybe set a breakpoint there too. Let's build in. What does it come back with? Happy days. Oh, milestones. Bob. Results view. Error. Operation not supported. It's still saying unauthorized. Okay, so maybe one more thing. I'm going to come off screen to then go into, I'm going to copy this, I'm going to come off screen, I'm going to stick it into the token, and I'll give it a try. So the token's not going to be Bob anymore, it's going to be that, and I'll come off that screen and close it, and I'll run it again. I'm going to keep it off screen at the minute because the token was shown when I hovered over something before. Ooh. No. Maybe? Maybe. So I'm going to get rid of this and this. That was a new IEnumerable of that. So then in my GitHub provider, I needed to be able to return this and this mapping, kind of implicitly convert the type IEnumerable of GitReleaseManager milestone to GitReleaseManager milestone. What does that mean? Well, I know what it means, but I don't understand for why. That's the core, and that's the OctoKit milestone. So that there is an IEnumerable of, oh, because there isn't one for that one yet. Maybes? So let's do this and do this and put that in. I know I'm still off screen, I apologize. It says IEnumerable of, oh, sorry, I'm looking at that in the wrong place. So in the single one, what did it do? It said in here, get milestones first or default. Gotcha. Okay. So then here, milestones first or default. There. Fine. And then that's going to return just my milestone, he says. And then it's going to complain because it's not using an await. So is this an awaitable? It's not. Fine. Let's take that off just now then. Return. Oh, what's that about? Okay, let's do this. Return, execute async. Return milestone, question mark, that one. Execute async needs something. What time have we got left? Oh, I'm running out of time. I should do stuff. Oh, there's all sorts of, okay, fine. Let's grab that and grab that. And then throw this at the bottom. That one. Oh, that's not going to work. Throw new API exception. Those ones can come out though. Fine, let's do that. That one. Those can come out. Okay, fine. So that means that that one's no longer going to be complaining. First or default milestone. I should bring this back in because I think I haven't given a game away yet, but this is now saying, oh, hold on, that's the ones I just put in there, isn't it? No. So why is this complaining about? Can it implicitly convert type task of in-unit model to did it get mapped? Oh, I see. I think return mapper.map milestone. Come on. Milestone. There we go. Okay. What happens if I get to there? Do I get to there? I might just pull this off screen just in case I leak my API key again. Let's set a breakpoint there. If this works, I need to go inside. But I'm gonna just thinking, just running. I'm gonna remove that breakpoint. I'm gonna remove that breakpoint, and I'm gonna step over that, and I'm gonna step over that, and it's it didn't blow up, which is good. Oh, but it's also got null. Results view. It does have a milestone, and its title is 111. Oh, hold on, I did that wrong. Okay, hold on. Oh, whoa, I was away to leak my thing there. Hold on. Let's do. Why is that coming through with an equals? Let's try that again. Save that. Close that. Run that. Milestone title. Ooh, look at that. Okay. F10. F10. Ooh, that's got a milestone. Look at that. And then if we F10 through that, we've got a milestone. Okay, so let's bring this back then. So bring this back up. So I've absolutely cheated, right? I've absolutely cheated at the minute. I've hard-coded the project ID, which is the project I've just created. But if I step through this, then the end result here is I have a milestone that I've just created that is 1.1.1. Its state is open, got some other stuff in there, and I was able to get what I needed. Now, I need to figure out how to get this in a sensible way. And I may need to ask the project owners how they would do that. That's then going to die because I haven't implemented that. But over at GitLab, and I may ask the developers for an example. I might have to look through the tests that they're doing, because it does look like they've got some tests. So repository client, did I see some project stuff? Projects tests. So create async, create project, project client get by ID async. So straight away they've got an ID. Yeah, I may need to ask. Right, okay. Anyway, one thing I want to try just now. So I'm going to push a button on my Stream Deck just now, which should mark that I'm away to do a recap. And that'll help me when I come to kind of work through the video when I ultimately put it to YouTube. So I'm going to press the recap button. It said it did something, no idea what it did. But as a recap of what we've done tonight, we've been looking at GitReleaseManager. We're looking at what we need to do in order to add in a GitLab provider for GitReleaseManager. So we added in an additional input to, or not input, an additional option to the command line, which was -- provider. So you can set that to be GitLab, or you can leave it as nothing and it'll be GitHub by default. You can say -- provider GitLab. That will then go through our newly implemented IVCS provider, which essentially does nothing at the minute. But we then start to look at the GitLab API for getting things like milestones. So from here, I was able to get the milestones for a specific project, completely hard coded at the minute. I just got that ID from my directly from the source HTML source code for the project that I've got open on my page here. Need to figure out how to get that reliably from a URL, and then from there I need to fit, yeah, once I've got that, I can start picking out the information that's needed. So for example, this one is the get milestone async. I can then start doing the operations that opens the close of the milestones based on having the milestone then to do some stuff. But the fundamental of this is a lot of the API is driven by the project ID, and I don't know how to get that project ID based on whatever. I need to ask the question of the developers of the library what I'm doing wrong there. So that was it. Reasonably successful night. Lots more work to be done here, but feel that I'm making progress. So for now, that's me done. I'm going to press another button that I've got on my stream deck that should close out the stream. Hopefully that will all work. Corey, we can have a chat tomorrow if you're still around with regard to the question that you asked about cake add-ins. But for now, that's me done. Thank you very much. Talk to you later.